Thanks for joining us on KHOU 11 Plus. I'm Ugochi Iloka. Today we're talking about sexual assault awareness. Soon we'll hear from advocates, experts, and a survivor. But first, I want to take a moment to share a story from a local survivor and to remind you of the resources available. The Houston Area Women's Center, aka HAWC, has not only been around for nearly 50 years, but it's Houston's oldest main rape crisis center.
We can tell you that 1 in 4 women will be sexually assaulted. We can tell you that 1 out of every 7 or 10 men will be sexually assaulted.
So many cases go underreported. And since HAWC's deputy CEO, Sonia Corrales, says sexual assault is a public health crisis, HAWC is a part of SART, aka the Sexual Assault Response Team in Harris County.
There are certain initiatives that the Houston Area Women's Center is involved in. One of them is many partnerships in the community.
That includes working with law enforcement, hospitals, and other agencies to make sure rape survivors like Ana Polanco are treated with the right care. Do you still get emotional when you think about what happened to you as a teenager?
There's moments where I encounter a circumstance that is triggering and brings me back to that experience. I was very lucky and blessed to have a very skilled and trained professional counselor that helped me through understanding how to manage the trigger.
Ana has been attending HAWC counseling group sessions for the last 4 years and connected with other sexual assault survivors who supported her after she filed charges against her attacker. How has HAWC helped your life and your healing journey?
There was a lot of misconceptions and things that I believe that make me maybe feel guilty about the experience. HAWC empowered me to learn how the perpetrator is always the one that is at fault, and even if a victim stays quiet for over 10 years.
It's not just our problem, it's not just a problem of police, and it's not just a problem of prosecution, but all of our issues.
On top of counseling, legal and financial services are available at HAWC, even if you aren't staying in their new 5.5-acre residential building. We're walking inside one of their brand new apartment units. They have a total of 135 here at the new campus, and they can house around 360 people, tripling their capacity size of survivors they help.
Without any kind of services or any kind of support to survivors, we will go to a place where people will live with their trauma and not get any access to any support.
Let's not forget that we are survivors. There's people that encounter the same experience and they don't make it out.
Every time she receives the free help provided, she gets stronger and less stressed about her past. Ugochi Iloka, KHOU 11 News. Yeah, and April 30th marks Denim Day, a global movement that began after a survivor was told her jeans were, quote, evidence of consent. And now it's a reminder that what you wear should never determine whether you are believed. And as you can see, we're all dressed here for the occasion. Everyone understood the assignment, and they have their denim on for Denim Day. Joining me now is Harris County District Attorney Sean Tier. Thanks for being here. Mary Sickler, who is Miss Houston and a survivor herself. Mary, thank you for being here. And then we have Leticia Manzano, and of course, we also have Monica Teresios from the Houston Area Women's Center. Thank you both for joining us here this morning.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, we appreciate it. You know, it's such an important conversation, especially on the last day of Sexual Assault Awareness Month. You all being here really represents that you support survivors and the efforts to stop sexual assault. So we want to start with Denim Day. It's such a powerful symbol, but I want to know what it represents personally for each of you. Sean, we can start with you first.
I think it should highlight the fact that for generations we have treated survivors of sexual assault with disrespect, with disbelief. And we've seen that translate to juries. We've seen it translate to police officers investigating it. We've seen it translate to prosecutors handling the cases. And so highlighting the fact that the first question of the survivor is, what were you wearing? It's 2025. We've got to stop.
Yeah. Mary, for you, what does it mean?
I think the biggest thing is knowing that you're not alone. I know I was a college student when it happened to me, and I just felt like I was alone, like I was the only girl that this happened to. And what I realized doing upon research is that only 10% of survivors report. And being able to wear denim on this denim day is really empowering because you realize that there are so many people like you and there are so many survivors.
That's right. And Monica?
I think for me, it's being able to raise awareness and educating the community about such a public challenge, like something that really impacts our entire community. And it's important that we really believe survivors, we raise awareness, and we also help them heal in their journey.
Yeah, raising their voices. And Leticia?
For me, it represents two things. The first is that still we don't have an understanding of what consent is. This is a great time to highlight what is consent, and definitely it is, you know, being clear, having a clear yes from the person, not assuming. And the other thing in particular with this case that brought about Denim Day is that the attacker was known to the survivor. So usually survivors are assaulted by someone that they know, whether it's an acquaintance. In this case, it was a driving school instructor, or it could be a family member, it could be a friend, someone that they know.
Yeah, and it's just alarming to think someone so close, right, in your circle could be the actual perpetrator, but that is what we're seeing at times. Speaking of consent, Leticia, can you talk about what is consent? What does that mean in terms of people who are still blurring the lines on that?
Yes, so I actually work in the prevention, on the prevention team, violence prevention, and so I think teaching about consent is one of the most important things that we can do. So first of all, consent is freely given. So that means that nobody should manipulate or trick, threaten, or force someone to engage in any sexual act. The second is that it's reversible. Everyone should know that they have the right to say no, even after they've begun kissing, or they've agreed to go back to somebody's apartment. They can say, you know what, I changed my mind, and it is reversible at any time.
That's right.
It is also not implied. You know, you can't tell. I remember working with with a group of young men in a high school, and one of them was like, you can just tell by the look in their eye. And no, that is not true.
No.
And so, you know, these are some of the things that make consent real, is being able to talk about what you want to do and getting a clear yes.
Yeah, it's huge. And Mary, you know, you've really just had the courage to share about your story, and it's had impact, and I would imagine others that can relate. Can you talk to us why it was important for you to speak up about what happened to you?
I think there's a big shame stigma around talking about it. I know that when I first walked into the police station, like many girls, my first question was, well, what were you wearing? And as someone who was wearing a sweatshirt, I was very confused by this question. And I really just wanted to share my story so that way women know that they are able to talk about this. We need to make sure that we are bringing up these hard conversations so that way if it happens to someone, they know that they can find their healing through the power of their voice.
Yeah, that's huge. Now, Monica, from a behavioral actual perspective, what does trauma look like when it comes to a survivor, and how does the culture sometimes, when it comes to traumatized people, how do they do it without realizing? I'm sure sometimes it's not always on purpose.
Right, so trauma is such an individualistic experience. It's unique to every single person, and how they react and the impact it has on them is also individualistic, but it does have such a significant change in their neurobiology, in their mental health, in their physical health, and so it's important that survivors also learn to recognize what are some of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder that could occur after a traumatic experience. And so having flashbacks, having nightmares, having significant stressors, all of these things will impact them. And we're here at the Houston Area Women's Center to really help them heal, to really help them understand what trauma is and the impact that it has on them, and help them start that healing journey.
Yeah, lots of support there at the center that is available to people. And DA Tier, you know, we really want to understand when it comes to sexual assault cases, how are they unique in terms of prosecution?
They're extremely difficult to prosecute, and that goes to a number of different fronts. In a lot of cases, there is a lack of physical evidence. That you have the physical evidence when you're talking about a murder, an aggravated robbery, things like that. In a lot of these, especially intimate partner and acquaintance sexual assaults, outcry isn't immediate. You don't have the DNA, you don't have those kind of things, and so you rely on consent. The offenders rely on the shame stigma that happens over and over. And quite frankly, once you get over all of those hurdles, you still have a jury panel that has been conditioned for generations to say, and of course there are victims that are male, but boys will be boys. It's okay. And so you've got to jump those hurdles as well before you ever get to conviction. One thing that I think is incumbent on panels like this, on groups like this, is that we continue the message to all of them. I have handled and spoken with and counseled hundreds of survivors of sexual assault and seen them go through the entire process. It is an arduous process. To suggest that there are a rash and a big number of people that falsely claim this, that falsely go to police and then proceed through the entire process is just, it's wrong, it's false. If a survivor is courageous enough and strong enough to come forward and to stick through the process, we need to believe them, we need to empower them, and we need to utilize every resource we have to hold those offenders accountable.
Such a strong stance coming from the DA's office, Sarah. And Mary mentioned victim blaming. How do we move past the question of what were you wearing exactly and what were you drinking? What do you think it's going to take? Obviously a culture shift, but how does that happen?
I know in college that it's normal to drink and it's normal to go out and party, and then people may think that you're consenting to something. And it is so important that you know that no is an entire sentence. That's all a girl has to say is no. And we have to restructure that idea of consent in our minds and in our culture and start teaching consent at a younger age. We need to make sure that in high schools we're teaching people that no means no. And if a girl says no, that means stop.
Starting earlier.
Yes.
To really let people know what it is. That's a good point. And Leticia, you focus heavily on prevention. So what are the most effective tools in terms of programming in place today at the Houston Area Women's Center?
I'm happy to hear what some of the panelists have said so far. I think it's important to talk to the community about just the dynamics of sexual assault, but also what are some of the root causes. And one of the root causes that Mr. DA Tier mentioned is this idea of boys will be boys. So rigid gender roles plays an important part of what attitudes and beliefs and values that men might have towards women, and not needing to respect a human being. Those are values that need to be taught, but some people just don't get them. So it's important for community members, all of us have to be part of the solution. And also, what Mary was saying, and Monica, it's important to know that sometimes when a person is being assaulted, attacked, traumatized, they may not give that clear no. They may freeze and not be able to say no. And so it goes back to get the clear yes. I had, again, a teenager that I was working with, a young girl around 15 or 16 who had been assaulted by a friend of her dad's. And so somebody in the group said, but did you say no? And she said, no, but I was crying. So first of all, that question in a support group of survivors from a survivor, did you say no, means that attitude is still there. And then to me, it's first of all, an adult should not be having any sexual encounter with a teenager. But second, she didn't have to say no. She was crying. If it was another teenager, check in. Are you okay? I see tears. What's going on? I'm going to stop. So the onus needs to go back, on typically boys and men who are the aggressors.
Yeah, and we talk about gender roles and just gender perspectives on things, but I know I have some friends who are moms to boys, and on the other side there are boys who also get sexually assaulted, and they hear about it later, much later, because there's almost like not an open space to talk about it. Is there anything you can share when it comes to on the other side, when it comes to boys and female predators, and how it might be even more difficult for them to speak out because of the stigma?
Yes, I think it's important to note that when boys or men are sexually assaulted, it is usually by other men or boys. It's not necessarily by female aggressors, although those are the things that we see on the news. A female teacher to a male student, those make the news. But on a daily basis, boys are being assaulted by adult males, and we don't talk about that. I think we need to, again, change those beliefs and say it only happens to girls, it happens to boys, they do not speak out, they come out, way later. So for moms that are watching, yes, talk to both of your children about, at their age level, about good touch and bad touch, and about consent and who can touch you in this way and who can't. A doctor, if I'm present, sure, right? We talk to children about what's under their bathing suit is their private parts. So there are ways to talk to children about consent as well.
Speaking of that, where do parents and caregivers fit when it comes to prevention? Just having those talks like you mentioned, or is there more that they can do? And anyone can answer.
Well, I think it's important to identify what risk factors are there and then teach parents protective factors. So one of those protective factors is being open about these conversations, just instilling safety as a part of what our life is going to be like at home. Safety, it can be a number one. It's about not touching the hot stove. It can be about not running into the street. But also it can be about if you're uncomfortable with someone in our house, at your uncle's house, because again, it's usually going to be someone that they know. If there is a school teacher who is making you uncomfortable, let me know. I'm going to believe you. You're not going to get in trouble, because that's another fear that children have, is if I say something, I'm going to get in trouble. And typically the abuser is saying that. Yeah. And so, and one of the bigger ones that I hear often is, if you tell someone, I'm going to hurt somebody else in your family. Ooh. So it's important that kids know that these are lies that aggressors tell. So I'm going to believe you. You're not going to get in trouble. I'm going to do everything in my power to stop it from happening, right? And to keep you safe.
Yes, that's good advice there. And, shifting gears to universities and schools, what role should they play when it comes to educating students about consent and boundaries? I wonder if there should be education coming from the DA's office about different things that could be shared, or just survivors. How do we get that out in these different institutions to start young?
From the prosecutor's standpoint, college campuses are some of the most dangerous places in regards to sex assault. As Mary said, because you have young adults that are for the first time drinking, living on their own. And then when you compound that with sometimes entities and organizations that don't want the label of an institution that has sexual assault occurring, you have a recipe for underreporting, even more so than normal. You have a recipe for investigations that aren't conducted as thoroughly as they should be, which at the end of the day means that offenders don't get held accountable, survivors don't get empowered and believed. And so from the DA's office, what we are committed to doing is working with every one of the universities in our jurisdiction to work with their police departments to really empower them to investigate these, to go after them aggressively, and in addition to call in when needed the larger agencies, Houston Police Department, the Sheriff's Department, all of these that work on sex assaults every single day, to make sure that every sex assault outcry is investigated appropriately.
That's so important, and that kind of leads me to my other question for you, Sean. How is, I guess, your office collaborating and working with groups like HAWC or other organizations to support survivors during the legal process, which can be draining, sometimes defeating? I'm sure you deal with some who just end up quitting altogether.
No question. I think that the stakeholders and the players in the sexual assault space are, by necessity, the overlap with domestic violence is very thorough. We have so many groups that are doing great work, that really want to help. What I see from the DA's office and what I'm committed to doing is to really give them all a space to collaborate together. One safe space that HAWC has opened is a great starting point to have all the stakeholders in one place. But it can't just stop there. We've got to bring in and collaborate with all of these organizations that are sometimes siloed and doing one great thing. But if we use force multipliers and are all together, we can help so many more survivors. And so the DA's office, as it is for 86 police agencies in Harris County, I want it, and it is already becoming the hub for all of these organizations to work collaboratively together to really multiply their reach to save more lives, quite frankly.
That's huge.
I think the other thing I want to mention is that, and this is, I'm going to say kind of new, is that Harris County has a sexual assault response team.
Yep.
That's right.
And so, we're collaborating and looking at our practices, at our policies, at our protocols, because we're not perfect, right? HAWC is not perfect. The DA's office is not perfect. The law enforcement is not perfect, but we want to improve every system that a survivor might interact with. We want to make sure that we're not victim blaming. We want to make sure that we are trauma informed. We want to make sure that we're trained. And so, we collaborate on a monthly basis. We're reviewing cases. What went wrong in this case? What went right? At the hospital systems, right? So going to get a rape kit done, they're a part of the process. So forensic interviewers are a part of the process. So collaboration is very, very important.
That's huge. You talked about SART, but can you go into how the different agencies really coming together help that work, essentially?
Yes, so one of the first things that we did in 2023 was look at, for example, how many cases were brought forward to the police department and how many cases that the Houston Area Women's Center and other women's centers in Harris County heard from survivors that they didn't report to the police. So looking at that discrepancy, and then looking at, again, the police, how many were able to get that evidence to move forward to present the case to the DA, how many times there wasn't enough evidence and the DA had to turn that down, how many times that those cases that were taken actually got through prosecution, and how many actually had like a verdict that we all want, that the person was found guilty and that they had to spend time in jail. And our numbers were low. Our numbers were really low. They were, not 100. They were in a very low number. And so we want to ensure that then that comes back on me, right? Educating the public about how the police department wants you to report. That's community education, letting the community know, like a program today, the police want you to come forward, right? So that way we can identify changes that we need to make.
That's huge. And you mentioned barriers, and Sean, you can also weigh on this as well, but what barriers keep survivors from choosing not to report? Mary, you can even probably talk about this. What keeps them from not wanting to report, essentially?
Like I mentioned before, I think the shame stigma is huge. We grew up in a society where if this happens to you, you want to keep it hush, you don't want to talk about it. And that just perpetuates that shame stigma. You think, well, I could have done this differently, I could have worn this differently. And I think that just really creates a cycle of honestly just shame, and you don't want to talk about it. But if we start talking about these really, really hard topics, and I know that it's hard to talk about, I think that so many more women's healing journeys can finally begin, because I know that I finally started to heal when I spoke up.
Speaking of healing, Monica, not all victims want to report it, or maybe they're not ready to now. And that's why you see cases where it's like 5-10 years after the fact. That's when they have the courage enough to do it. But in the meantime, what can they do to heal, or at least start that healing process?
I think it's being able to maybe find someone that you trust, or even if you're not ready to talk to someone close to you, even journaling about it, telling your story somewhere is helpful. But I think at the Houston Area Women's Center, we believe in the empowerment advocacy model. And if there are any survivors that are listening today, I think it's to understand that the Houston Area Women's Center is here to support the community, to support survivors at any stage. And we're here to really meet them where they are. Whether it is, getting to tell someone for the first time, whether it's having to process some of the fear or the shame, or if you're ready to report, we're here to support you and help you through that journey and process when you're ready. And so that is something that the Houston Area Women's Center does really well, is meeting survivors where they are. And so if there are any survivors out there, we just recommend calling our hotline and having that first conversation with someone who's confidential, who is there to provide that support.
And there's a little bit of everything for every survivor there. I visited, and I just couldn't, just seeing all the different resources and specialists there. I mean, there's a little bit of everything, which is good. They can see what fits for them. Now, are there resources or support groups in Houston specifically for male or LGBTQ survivors?
Go ahead.
So at the Houston Area Women's Center, we do provide individual counseling support for survivors of domestic and sexual violence to men, women, and children. And then we also have support groups that are available. We provide them in person, and we also have them virtually. So we try to meet clients where they are, what's most accessible to them. We have them in different languages, and we also have them spread out around for different times that may be more flexible for survivors. So any survivor that is looking for any support, we do have the resources at the Houston Area Women's Center to meet those needs.
It's huge. And Mary, you teach self-defense and even created an app, which is really cool. But what do you think young people are missing most when it comes to conversations about personal safety?
I think the biggest thing that we're missing is a community around us that when we talk about it, we're supported. I remember that when I first spoke to my previous university that I was attending and told them what happened to me, I was met with, well, if you didn't feel safe, you can just transfer schools.
Oh my goodness.
And that was not the solution that I was really wanting to have, but unfortunately it came to a point where that's what I had to do. But I think to achieve finally healing and justice is to have more than just a conviction on your side, or have more than just going to the police to report. It's about having that community around you and having that community that believes you. And I know that belief is one of the most important things. And I'm so proud to be in a family that when I told them, they believed me from the start.
Well, Mary, I see you getting emotional. And for survivors listening out there, I'm sure you want to translate to them that it's okay to feel that. You've been through something traumatic, you overcome it, and now you're sharing your story here today, and we appreciate you for that. So we also want to really look at, what does justice look like beyond the courtroom? Mary talked a lot about support. The University of Houston partnered with HAWC, where they had students that had a day where they were supporting survivors. I feel like that's a form of justice, taking a stand. What are other ways in terms of what it looks like beyond the verdict, if they get one?
So in addition to being in prevention, I also spent quite a bit of time counseling survivors of sexual assault at the Houston Area Women's Center. And that was a great question in support groups. What does justice look like to you? And survivors said things like, that were sometimes out of their control. Like, I just want him to apologize. I just want him to acknowledge what he did. And so very few times that could happen for survivors. So they found justice in other ways. They found justice by using their voice to invite other survivors to the conversation. They also said, you know, justice for me looks like telling my family what happened, especially if it was a family member that did it, letting other people know that this happened to me. That could be justice.
That's huge, like just being open about it and having that support. You know, Mary talked about her family being there for her. Not everyone has that. Even it's surprising to see your own family. We see a lot of, well, what did you do? What did you wear? The almost in denial, sometimes from your own flesh and blood. Do you see a lot of that too?
Yeah, and so Monica was mentioning, you know, the counseling services, and I think that that's why they exist. And that's why support groups exist. We want to break down the isolation that's happening for survivors, and we want them to have a safe space where other people can say, I can relate to you. That happened to me. My issue wasn't exactly like yours, but I feel like you do. And so I think it's really important to find community in a counseling support group. And so at the Women's Center, we really elevate those groups because, you know, you are breaking the silence by speaking about it. You are speaking with a counselor who's facilitating, who has the knowledge to interrupt you when maybe you are talking bad about yourself, when you're blaming yourself. And then there are other survivors who have been there and said, you know, I was in your shoes when I first got here. And now that I've been here for 6 months, these are the coping skills that I've learned. And this is how I'm talking to myself now, with self-compassion and with empathy.
Yeah. You know, Mary, as someone who got that love and support, what advice would you give to someone who recently found out that one of their loved ones was also sexually assaulted, in terms of supporting them? What are the kinds of things you heard that helped you that could help someone else?
I think one of the biggest things is just being there for them. And my family is a huge proponent of therapy. And I think that was one of the biggest things that helped me. As I was able to go into a place and into a space where I felt safe, and I was able to really just talk about it without any shame or any stigma or worried about what someone else was going to say. So I would encourage all family members to be there, first of all, to be present, but also to really encourage someone going to get help, and really knowing that it's okay to want to be okay, but more importantly, it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah. And to just let it out instead of bottling it up, because that'll, I would imagine, blow up later. So just letting it all out is definitely a normal feeling too. Now, John, you know, we are trying to really gauge county, are there any county-wide or statewide initiatives regarding shifting these outcomes when it comes to sexual assault cases, since they're so hard, you mentioned, to prosecute?
You know, we talked about SART earlier. That is one of the real, I think, game changers in the way that we are able to prosecute these cases. And as we talked about earlier, it's because we are constantly doing a review on how we can get better. And you're gonna see, I mean, this is a sea change. We can't change this overnight. We can't change the perception of the veneer panels. We can't change the investigative tools that we have overnight. We can't change the way that we present evidence overnight. But it's gotta be a continuous learning and reevaluation and self-introspection for the whole places or for the whole group as a whole. But I think what is so important that we haven't done internally at the DA's office that we're going to do, talking about empowering survivors, is having conversations, very frank conversations with survivors when they first outcry, when they first come into contact with our office, having trauma-informed social workers, having trauma-informed prosecutors that can explain the process, number one, but also explain what healing looks like as you're going through the criminal justice process. Letting, you know, the amount of survivors that we've gotten good outcomes on. And then you talk to them 6 months later and they say, I thought I would feel
Better.
more closure or better. But preparing them that it's just a step in the healing process. Getting a good outcome, getting a bad outcome. Any of that is just a step in a, quite frankly, lifelong healing process for many, many of these survivors. But being upfront, being honest, and doing it in a trauma-informed and compassionate way is the way that we have to show up for the courageous men and women and our trans community that have the ability to outcry and to go forward with the process.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Sean, about what you all are working on and just trying to make it better for them, which is huge. You know, if there was one culture shift you could make today to change the way society really deals with sexual assault, what would it be? And each of you can answer this.
I can say at the Houston Area Women's Center, we love to talk about the 3 R's of advocacy. And that is to recognize, the community needs to recognize that this does impact us, that it does exist, that it is in our universities, in schools, in our community. And so we want to recognize that the sexual assault is happening and that it does impact survivors. And then we want to also respond when a survivor makes an outcry, making sure that we believe them, that we provide that support, and that we're there to listen, and then that we refer to the proper resources, like the Houston Area Women's Center, here to make sure that we help survivors in meeting them where they are and also helping them in their healing journey.
Yeah. Anyone else want to answer?
Yeah, I think for me it's going back to consent at all levels, So I think about, like in my culture, I am Hispanic, and one of the things that people just tend to do is walk up to a pregnant woman and just touch her belly, right?
I think that's everyone.
That is not consensual.
No, it's not.
You know, not all people feel comfortable being touched. Some people come up to you and give you 2 kisses on the cheek. Not everyone is comfortable with that kind of touch, hugs. And so if we can incorporate consent about touching people in every aspect of their life, we might solve sexual assault.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, Monica, how does social media impact the way young people view sexual violence, boundaries, and consent? I mean, I can't imagine, I was telling my mom this, like, I can't imagine growing up now. Like, I'm a 90s kid, and just the stuff that's exposed and it's out there, I would imagine it's blurring some lines or maybe confusing some kids.
Right, I think it's such a heavy topic and a very good question. I think social media definitely is impacting and influencing our younger generations, but I think it also has the opportunity for us to be able to stream and educate through these platforms also proper ways of consent. Yes, as much as there's like music videos or all these things that are probably not implying healthy relationships or limitations and boundaries. I think there's also other resources out there as well on these social media platforms, and I think it's important that we're also elevating those that do help us educate younger generations that are being influenced by social media, what is proper consent, how to elevate survivors' voices, and how to also make an outcry and not also be a bystander. I think is important.
That's huge. What signs should someone look for to recognize they're like in an unsafe relationship, even if it's not physical, or there are certain things that could be said, like buzzer words, when you feel like something's wrong that they should look out for?
I think for me, we really talk to survivors and people who have not gone through sexual assault, talking about just listening to your inner voice. If it doesn't feel right for you, if you are uncomfortable, listen to that. Because I think another thing with this gender role, when we talk about roles, is that women and girls are taught to be nice. And so sometimes out of these niceties, we don't hold our boundaries, right? If a person is standing too close to you when they're talking to you, it is okay to say, I'm gonna back up a bit. I'm uncomfortable, you're a little close. Yeah. You can smile while you say it, but you don't have to be nice and just stand there and be uncomfortable the whole time. So I think that that's, important when we talk about sexual assault is just really holding those boundaries. But again, if someone chooses to disrespect your boundaries, it's not your fault. That person has an issue with boundaries, and that person oftentimes, if they are a sexual aggressor, they don't care about the boundaries, so it can still happen. And I think that that's one of the most important things that we can say to survivors out there. It doesn't matter what you did, look at the other person's behavior.
That's huge. Yeah, all really good points. Wanted to shift gears here about men. Sean, you are only male on the panel representing, and the DA's office.
That.
Yeah. Also, the DA's office representing that as well, being the DA. But on a serious note, how can men really place themselves more into these kinds of conversations instead of shying away from it, or essentially societal norms or stereotypes about things, where what was she wearing? How can they place themselves in the conversation to be a part of the solution? What would you say to them?
I think it is so important for men to have a real voice in this conversation, to empower survivors, and to also call out sexual aggressors, people that don't respect boundaries when it happens. And sadly, we were just talking about social media. We're shifting the wrong way in a lot of ways, where men are not only getting out on social media and not empowering survivors, but are actively shaming survivors. And so those of us that I like to think of myself as an ally, I've got 2 daughters,
You do?
So we've got to be just as loud as that group that is trying to take us back even further. We've got to be here and have survivors and have other stakeholders know that we're here, without trying to take over the conversation and be the center of the conversation. Just be a resource and do what we can to call out this kind of behavior when we see it, while still being supportive of survivors and the courageous men and women that come forward.
Yeah, that's huge.
You know, something I would like to see, I just thought of this while you were speaking, is I would like to see men donate to the Houston Area Women's Center. If you can't do anything else, send those donations.
I like that plug.
Right? For all the services, but if you want services for males, or you want the Houston Area Women's Center to take a lead and incorporate men into the work, we need some funds. Let me tell you that TASA, the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault, has a man who was hired to do engagement for men. Oh. And tomorrow he's kicking off a series called Texas Men Speak.
Oh my goodness.
And so he's gathering men on a webinar, on a Zoom meeting, to have discussions. I think tomorrow's discussion is, what is toxic masculinity? Men sometimes get offended by that word. Some men are curious about that word. And so it's important to have those conversations in male groups. Atlanta has a group called Voice Male, MALE, and they do publications that they sent around to male groups. San Francisco has the Oakland Men's Project, not San Francisco, it's Oakland Men's Project, Northern California. I would like to see Houston have something like that. But you know what? We need the resources. So if you can't think of any other way to support a survivor, donate to the nearest women's center to you, and say, I want this contribution to go to male survivors.
Speaking of, that kind of leads us to our next question. What are simple ways everyday people can support survivors or advocates for change? What can they do? Is there anything they can do with the DA's office, or just survivors, as well as HAWC? Each one of you can share any advice you have.
I want to echo what was said. Look, we don't take donations. We are just public servants. Okay. But we work hand in hand with so many incredible organizations like HAWC that rely almost exclusively on donations from the public. So if nothing else, donate. But donate your time. It is just as valuable, in a lot of cases more valuable than the money that you could donate. Get out and work with people. Be a resource in every way possible. And so those just everyday stuff, it doesn't take a lot of time. And the payback is truly incredible.
Huge for our community.
I want to go back to a question that you had earlier about, what is happening across the state, what's happening in Houston, which also relates to what people can do. What some of us do at a let's say at a different level is that we look at policy. We look at what are the laws around sexual assault and how can we improve those laws. And so the Governor's Task Force Against Sexual Assault is putting forth some bills. Like they're on, they're in committee right now. They need to go, forward. And so calling your legislator, knowing what those bills are, calling the hotline at the Houston Area Women's Center and saying, hey, I heard this lady talking about these bills. What are they? Right? Who are the representatives that I need to call? That's a way to get involved. So civic engagement. HAWC looks at this problem of sexual assault as a public health model, and we need to look at the individual who it's happened to. We need to look at the relationships, community, and then systems. So systems change, advocacy, very important.
Yeah, it's a public health crisis. It really is. And when we talk about rebuilding trust and relationships after experiencing assault or abuse, Mary, what did that look like for you? And then Monica, if you can weigh in about how you help survivors rebuild that trust after her.
That was something that was really hard for me, honestly. And just knowing when you could feel safe somewhere was honestly really scary. Anywhere you went, at least for me, I was a little worried, what if I'm gonna bump into him? What's gonna happen then? But I think it's just having trust in yourself and putting yourself in positions when it first happens just to feel comfortable. And then something big for me was I actually started taking self-defense classes.
That's right.
And that really helped me rebuild my confidence because I knew I was able to walk in a scary parking lot at night and not feel scared, go into a Target and not have to check around the halls and see who was there. But I think that's a huge thing, just learning how to gain that confidence again. And I know it looks differently for everyone, but for me, I loved self-defense. And I actually loved it so much that I became a self-defense instructor.
You did.
And I host my own self-defense camp.
It's so cool and empowering. There's some women like myself, and my daughter helped me with this, but she does karate. And I at first was like, oh, this is too intense. How do you get women to be open to self-defense and things of that nature? So
just this past October, I actually hosted a self-defense camp for women and daughters, and there was girls aged 4 all the way to about 75. Wow. So it was a huge age gap, but what I noticed is that every single woman wanted the same thing. They all wanted to gain confidence. Even those little 4-year-olds wanted to learn how to beat up their brother, which maybe not be the best thing to teach a 4-year-old how to properly punch a brother. But it just goes to show that women just want to have confidence. They just want to feel safe going places. And if knowing how to throw a proper punch, or for me, I'm able to throw my 6'5" brother over my shoulder, just knowing how to do that really just makes you feel so much better going into new situations.
Yeah, that's huge. And Monica, how do you all support survivors still trying to rebuild trust and just get to a better place?
Yeah, I think it's, as I spoke about trauma being an individualistic experience, so is the healing journey. It is different for every survivor, and I think it's important that we also, my favorite words, meet them where they are, respect that the journey for them is also where they are, what they need. And I think for us, we try to teach coping skills, whether it's mindfulness, whether it's processing the trauma, psychoeducation. There are therapeutic models out there that also help them connect with their senses and connect with their body again. And so those are some things that we work with at the Houston Area Women's Center in our counseling services to be able to help survivors process that trauma, but understand and respect that the healing journey is also individualistic. And I love hearing Mary's story about self-defense, because I think using what those strengths are, those coping skills that they come up with to be able to rebuild themselves and rebuild that confidence and strength is important.
Yeah, so everyone's process looks different. There are options available for everyone, depending on what that looks like. I just wanted to mention some of the questions that we have been asking have been viewer questions. You know, yesterday we asked people to send us questions that they wanted us to ask our panel. So a lot of the questions you've been hearing during this program is from viewers. So you guys are answering the questions straight from the people who want to hear from you. So thank you so much for that. We're really talking to those who needed to hear this information. So in terms of how people can really be a part of the community solution as a process year-round when it comes to sexual assault awareness and how important it is, not just this month, but past this month. We talked about donations, we talked about volunteering. Is there anything else you all can think of that they can do? Obviously, a culture shift is important, but is there more that folks can do? Everyone has this mentality, if it hasn't happened to you, not my problem, they ignore it. But then if it's something they love or themselves, now they're listening. But they can start listening and doing something now, right?
Mm-hmm. I think personal attitudes are huge. I am actually competing for Miss Texas USA this weekend, and I've been competing for the past 3 years. And on my onstage question last year, I was able to talk about my story and share my story of sexual assault. And the amount of women that came up to me after the pageant was just astounding. I think what people need to realize is, one, that they are not alone. This happens to 1 in 3 Texans, which is way too high. But 2, that if you hear someone talk about it and you have those personal attitudes and you feel compelled to go up to them, know that you will be met with respect and kindness, because I believe you. And I think it is so important to know that you have that community around you, even if it's just some random girl talking about it at a pageant. Knowing that someone there is with you is going to be huge in changing these conversations.
And I think that what Mary just said is so important for everyone to listen to and understand, because it's 1 in 3. It means that while you may not think that it has happened to your family and your loved ones, statistics say it has already. And so being able to meet them where they are, to be vigilant inside your own home, to check your kids' social media, check your kids' phones, be present, and then show up when an outcry happens. Just modeling that behavior is going to change so much of what we do.
A message to the offenders, anyone thinking about trying it?
Yeah. Texas Department of Criminal Justice is not a fun place.
Ooh.
And I will send you there.
There you go. You heard it from Sean. Anything else you all want to weigh in on about sexual assault?
Yeah, so we're talking about, what are some other ways that you can just do something all year long. A protective factor for preventing sexual assault, but also for intervening when it has already happened, is becoming a safe person. How do you become a safe person? You start by believing. You don't blame them. You tell the person they're not alone, and you know those resources. We talked about that. But I think another thing is become that person that people will go up to, even if it hasn't happened to you, because I think it is a myth that some people believe, I don't know anybody who that's happened to. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. If it happens to 1 out of 3 women and 1 out of 6 men, and these are just from reported numbers, you know somebody, but maybe they haven't told you because of the attitudes that you've had about something you heard on the news or about the girl who lives down the street. And so it's important to stop those behaviors that might be victim blaming and become a safe person. Be the person, be the aunt that everybody comes to, be the uncle that people go to for advice. Be that safe person. And you can do that, in relationships, you can do that in your community.
Yeah. On that note, we want to thank our panelists for joining us today on this chat, this very important conversation about sexual assault awareness. And for now, we're just going to send it off. Of course, if you have any other questions, you can, of course, message them and we'll follow up later. But we really want to thank you all for being here today. You all shared a lot of important information. And we've got a lot of other original content ready for you, including more discussions like this one that we just had. Be sure to watch those for free right here on KHOU 11+. I'm Ugochi Iloka. Until next time.